Hi everyone. In today's podcast, we're going to be addressing one of the main elements of the metaphysics of A Course in Miracles. In its creation myth, it talks about how a part of oneness seemed to fall asleep and dream that it wished to have special attention from God. And of course, God can't give special attention to anything because in oneness, there is no possibility of separation or distinction. In chapter 13, in a section called The Fear of Redemption, the Course says, "You were at peace until you asked for special favour, and God did not give it, for the request was alien to him. And you could not ask this of a father who truly loved his son. Therefore, you made of him an unloving father, demanding of him what only such a father could give." So only an unloving father could give special attention to any aspect of creation over and above any other aspect of creation. The Course goes on to say, "And the peace of God's Son was shattered, for he no longer understood his Father." This idea of God having favourites. Firstly, we want the special attention, we want the special favour, and believe that he is a God that can give that. But because we don't receive it, we then hate him for it. And in the ego's thought system, if we don't have something, it means that somebody else has got it. So we don't have the favour. We must assume that he's placing that favour and that attention elsewhere. And this podcast explores that element of the Course's creation myth. And it does so using John Milton's book, Paradise Lost, and his retelling, his very imaginative retelling of Satan's fall from heaven and how that was all related to wanting special favour and how that also relates to Adam and Eve's fall. We'll be looking at some reflections from Anne Frank, from the writer David Sedaris about his father, and from the fashion designer Alana Hill relating to her mother. Let's begin the reading. The Favourite. The essay begins with a quote from the French philosopher Simone Weil. "You do not interest me. No man can say these words to another without committing a cruelty and offending against justice." End of quote. John Milton was an ambitious man. The 17th century English poet is most famous for Paradise Lost, his attempt at creating an epic to stand alongside the works of Homer and Virgil. Milton's story is a rewriting of the events leading up to Adam and Eve's fall from grace, and it's quite a rewrite. The tale begins with Satan and his fellow rebel angels, now devils, lying, quote, "thunderstruck and astonished, chained to a burning lake in hell." Later in the story, we find out how Satan and his gang fell from grace, and this essay centres around this aspect of Milton's epic. We get an account of Satan's fall from the archangel Raphael, who one day sits down with Adam and Eve to share a meal in paradise. Raphael tells the couple how Satan was once happy in heaven with God, that is, while he was God's right-hand man. Satan was once the most powerful of God's angels, the first archangel, great in power, in favour and preeminence. But then God had to ruin everything by creating the Son of God. This was Christ the Saviour, but not yet in physical form. Satan became envious of the Son's appointment as God's second in command. The God with whom he never used to have an issue now became to him heaven's awful monarch. Some other angels were also angry at the news, and together with Satan they plotted a war against God. A civil war broke out in heaven as Satan led a third of heaven's angels into battle against God's faithful army, led by archangels Michael and Gabriel. On the third day of battle, God sent his Son, quote, "for whom he had reserved the glory of that victory," into the fray. The Son drove into the midst of God's enemies on a chariot, pushing them to retreat towards heaven's walls, which opened as they approached, leaving Satan and his army to leap down with horror and confusion into the place of punishment prepared for them in the deep. That God got his favourite to drive Satan out of heaven must have hurt just that little bit more. For 9 days, Satan's legions fell through chaos until they landed in hell and immediately found themselves chained to a burning lake. The fallen army lay vanquished, rolling in the fiery gulf for a further 9 days until they freed themselves from the chains, flying to land. There they used rocks to construct a palace called Pandemonium. So this is still in hell, but no longer in the lake. They're now on land, a higher region, but still in hell. Inside Pandemonium, Satan and the infernal peers sit in council, debating whether they should begin another war with God. One devil, Beelzebub, suggests that they get back at God by corrupting his new creations, Adam and Eve. Satan volunteers for the task. Through various twists and turns, Satan soars through chaos and lands on earth where he leaps over paradise's wall. He takes the form of a serpent, and from here the temptation of Eve and eating of the fruit from the tree of knowledge more or less follows familiar lines. The serpent coaxes Eve into eating the apple, and Adam follows suit. God immediately knows of Adam and Eve's disobedience. He condemns Adam and Eve to suffer and toil in life until death, and the serpent is sentenced to never walking upright. Satan returns to hell and arrives at Pandemonium, where he is greeted with cheers. He boasts about his successful corruption of Adam and Eve and of God's punishment. Yes, he says, he too was judged, quote, or rather me not, but the brute serpent in whose shape man I deceived, end of quote. Satan is sure he has outwitted God, escaping all consequences for his offence. But where he expected the gathered crowd to meet his speech with universal shout and high applause, instead he hears a dismal universal hiss. Satan and his devils were turning into snakes. Subtitle: Freud and Milton. In 1907, the well-known Viennese book dealer and publisher Hugo Heller asked a number of distinguished figures of the time for a list of 10 good books. Among the replies was a letter from Freud, in which he said that if he'd been asked to list his favourite books, he would have definitely included Milton's poem. Perhaps it's no surprise that Sigmund Freud, whose career involved examining people's problems with their parents, was a fan of Paradise Lost. Freud had long admired men of heroic stature, and in Milton he found a hero, someone who'd fully realised their vision. Milton expressed his ambition through writing an epic for the ages about a civil war in heaven. Freud devised a psychological theory of development based on a civil war within the family. Sibling rivalry and conflict with parental authority were the bread and butter of Freud's theory. In his essay, Family Romances, he describes the universal shattering experience when a child feels overlooked by their parents. Quote, "There are only too many occasions on which a child is slighted, or at least feels he has been slighted, on which he feels he is not receiving the whole of his parents' love, and, most of all, on which he feels regret at having to share it with his brothers and sisters. His sense that his own affection is not being fully reciprocated then finds a vent in the idea, which is often consciously recollected from early childhood, of being a stepchild or an adopted child." End of quote. The following excerpt from The Diary of a Young Girl by Anne Frank provides a clear example of what Freud describes. Anne was 14 and had been hiding in an annex for over a year with her family to escape capture by Nazis. Her diary was her confidant. In it, she spoke of her fears, ambitions, and angst in dealing with her parents, particularly her mother, from whom she never felt she received enough attention or affection. And here is her diary entry from Wednesday, January the 12th, 1944. "Everyone here is reading a book called A Cloudless Morning. Mother thought it was extremely good because it describes a number of adolescent problems. I thought to myself a bit ironically, why don't you take more interest in your own adolescence first? Before I came here, when I didn't think about things as much as I do now, I occasionally had the feeling that I didn't belong to Mumsy, Pim and Margot, and that I would always be an outsider. I sometimes went around for 6 months at a time, pretending I was an orphan." End of quote. "I'll have to go it alone, rely on myself," is a natural conclusion when we feel estranged from the protection and affection of our parents. This is highlighted in Paradise Lost, when Satan, reflecting after his separation from God, can't remember being created, and so decides he must be self-begot. Rooted in pain, this conclusion manifests in ways we mightn't suspect. High on the list is how some successful business people mythologise the hardships of their childhood, emphasising they had no authority helping them along and that good fortune played no role in their ascent. They portray themselves as self-sufficient, as omnipotent. The need to generate such a narrative of autonomy suggests an emotional dependence too painful to acknowledge. Likewise, when Satan and another devil free themselves from their chains and the Stygian lake of fire, we read they were, quote, "both glorying to have escaped the Stygian flood as gods, not by the sufferance of supernatural power," end of quote. The devils had so much hatred for God that even to receive help from him would be something to endure. Better to reign in hell, they said, than serve in heaven. And that's actually what Satan declared after his fall. Better to reign in hell than serve in heaven. Subtitle: Talent Time. Another way our feelings of rejection and abandonment manifest is in a need to put down the talents of others, even our own children. It seems natural for parents to enjoy the successes of their children. To witness a parent cutting down their child's achievements is particularly jarring and perplexing. Inexplicable though it seems, this behaviour is likely to stem from the parent's own talents having been overlooked or minimised when they were young. The pioneering child psychoanalyst Melanie Klein would say the tendency then is to feel envious of the specialness we see in others and attempt to spoil it, like stepping on someone's sandcastle. The author David Sedaris, in his essay Memory Lapse, Summers on the Swim Team, provides a great example of this. When David called his father in 2008 to tell him his book was #1 on the Times bestseller list, his father was unmoved. "Well, it's not #1 on the Wall Street Journal list," he said. Yet Sedaris Sr. readily praised other people's children, most notably David's childhood swimming competitor. "God, that Greed Sarkis, did you see him go? Man alive, that kid is fantastic." Reading Australian fashion designer Alana Hill's memoir Butterfly on a Pin, I discovered equally stupefying parental responses. Alana's designs were being well received internationally, and she was invited by Henry Bendel, a department store on Fifth Avenue in New York City, to launch her collection in their store window. Despite sending her mother aeroplane tickets, organising car transfers and a hotel suite, her mother refused to acknowledge Alana's success, her talent. "Every seat I had reserved for her stayed empty," says Alana. "She never came, not to anything." Standing outside Henry Bendel's one day, Alana phoned her mother to share her excitement. The conversation didn't go well. Her mother was true to form. Quote, "Mum, I'm standing on Fifth Avenue, New York." "New York? Oh, you are not, Lana." "What window?" "Fifth Avenue. Didn't they want you on First Avenue, Lan? You only came Fifth?" My heart sank. End of quote. Reflecting on the reasons for his father's perpetual put-downs, David Sedaris concluded it was simply in his father's nature to act that way. "The guy sees a spark and just can't help but stomp it out," he said. His father wasn't without love, but there were put-downs aplenty. When this is the case, when a parent's, partner's, friend's behaviour seems utterly inexplicable, there's a psychological blind spot, a childhood trauma behind it. Likewise, when we're upset with someone for not recognising our capability or knowledge, for example, by not listening to or engaging or agreeing with us, behind that person stands a parent. And as we'll see in the following section, we can go a step further and say behind that parent stands our concept of God. Subtitle: The Special Son of God. Milton's myth of Satan's fall from grace contains parallels with the myth of separation central to A Course in Miracles. In the Course's myth, we wanted special favour from God, special attention, but he couldn't grant it because, being total oneness, such a request was alien to him. Not receiving special favour, we decided God must be withholding it from us, that he must be an unloving Father, and that we'd be better off without him. This is one aspect of what the Course refers to as the authority problem, and every time we feel our value has gone unrecognised and get upset, we are reliving the original instant when God didn't give us special favour, and that is what our anger and frustration are really about. Central to the ego's thought system is the idea that if we have something, someone else can't have it. If you have innocence, for example, I must have guilt. Thus, as the Course tells us, the biblical Jesus became the symbol of our sin. His divine status and innocence, his special status as God's only begotten Son, means that we are the not-so-special ones, the guilty, lowly ones. Being the favourite isn't all it's cracked up to be, however. Ask any teacher's pet. You might as well wear a target on your back. So too is Jesus' target, albeit unconsciously. Even if you identify as an atheist, there must be some envy of the central figure in the highest-selling non-fiction book of all time. Practically no one gets through life without hearing about Jesus. He is so special. This is why there are several passages in the Course in which Jesus asks us to forgive him. Here's a quote from the text: "I am made welcome in the state of grace, which means you have at last forgiven me." And another quote: "This Easter I would have the gift of your forgiveness offered by you to me and returned by me to you." End of quote. Jesus forgives us for attacking him, meaning these attacks have no effect on him at all. He sees them as the call for help that they are, having stemmed from an identification with the lonely, anxiety-producing belief in separation. One way of defining a miracle is that it is a correction for a misthought. Since all misthoughts are of the ego, they must embody the one or the other thought system, which stresses differences and competing interests. The correction for the idea of specialness is equality, and the Course reinforces this concept throughout its curriculum, emphasising our equality with Jesus and each other. Here is a quote from the workbook of A Course in Miracles. "Forgive me, then, today, and you will know you have forgiven me if you behold your brother in the light of holiness. He cannot be less holy than can I, and you cannot be holier than he." And a quote from the text: "Remember that there is no second to him. There cannot, therefore, be anyone without his holiness, nor anyone unworthy of his perfect love." End of quote. And another quote from the text: "Equals should not be in awe of one another, because awe implies inequality. It is therefore an inappropriate reaction to me. An elder brother is entitled to respect for his greater experience and obedience for his greater wisdom. He is also entitled to love because he is a brother, and to devotion if he is devoted. It is only my devotion that entitles me to yours." End of quote. That equals shouldn't be in awe of one another is a timely piece of advice for myself. Just yesterday I was reading about a concert with two artists I admire, the American violinist Hilary Hahn and the Australian conductor Simone Young. I couldn't believe my luck. Two people I esteem working together on a concerto with the Sydney Symphony Orchestra. I have never seen either artist live, and the thought of seeing them both in one performance felt overwhelming. In fact, I was so overcome I had to check myself. Am I a teenager? I was in awe of heroes. It's such an easy trap to fall into at any age. Then I thought a little longer about my excitement over the concert. Hahn and Young are heroes to me because they are both women in high-ranking positions. Female lead violinists and conductors are definitely a late 20th century phenomenon. It wasn't until 1997, for example, that the Vienna Philharmonic allowed women to audition for a position in the orchestra, let alone as a lead. Attending Catholic schools as a child in the 80s, the absolute patriarchy of the church had its effects on me. Select boys in the class would be called out regularly for altar boy practice. The only begotten child of God was male, and the priesthood was inaccessible to women. The message seemed clear. Women aren't as special as men. Even the Australian national anthem, which we sang regularly at school assembly, had the line, "Australia's sons, let us rejoice." This was later changed to "Australians all, let us rejoice." But it still begs the question, how did the original get past an edit? Ultimately, we all want to know that we are just as close to God as the most special of special people in this world, and of course, just as close as Jesus. If we don't know this, if we listen to the ego's story of specialness, we can't help but hate God. Hating him, we will push him away, disown him. We will feel parentless, self-begot, and experience the weight of vigilantly having to look after ourselves. And here are 3 quotes from the Course. The attack on God made his son think he was fatherless, and out of his depression, he made the God of depression. This was his alternative to joy, because he would not accept the fact that, although he was a creator, he had been created. Yet the son is helpless without the father, who alone is his help. So just this line here, he would not accept the fact that, although he was a creator, he had been created. That's another reason in the Course's mythology for our belief in the separation from God. Firstly, we wanted special attention as something special and different, and because God couldn't provide us with that as part of oneness being reality, we decided that he was ignoring us. And if we felt deprived of his attention, we would have assumed he was giving it to somebody else or something else. But the other reason for our belief in separation from God is that we wanted to be the creator of everything. We wanted to be self-begot. We wanted to be our own boss, the author of ourselves, and not be God's creation. We wanted the power of self-creation. And with that desire, we thought we had actually accomplished the impossible, that we had created a self separate from God. On to the second quote. Let the Christ in you interpret for you, and do not try to limit what you see by narrow little beliefs that are unworthy of God's Son. For until Christ comes into his own, the Son of God will see himself as fatherless. And another quote, I said before that of yourself you can do nothing, but you are not of yourself. End of quote. Whether or not we identify with a minority group, we all have something in our life script that has given us the message, not good enough. Midlife is the time for addressing the defences we adopted to deal with the pain and insecurity of this message. And I hearken back to the message or to the quote from Simone Weil at the beginning, you do not interest me. No man can say these words to another without committing a cruelty and offending against justice. Well, that is what we believe God pretty much said to us by not recognising us as something special. You do not interest me. And then, of course, in our lives as children growing up, we will perceive times when someone significant to us in one way or another says those words, you do not interest me, whether by speech or through action. That's how we will interpret things because we're primed to interpret things that way because of this underlying belief in our relationship with God. We will project it out and see its dynamics within our relationships with people in the world. So carrying on again, midlife is the time for addressing the defences we adopted to deal with the pain and insecurity of this message, the time for letting them go. Like Dante in his Divine Comedy, we face the anger, envy, greed, etc. associated with our past as we ascend toward union with our spiritual self. I find it interesting that Freud gravitated towards Milton's Paradise Lost and Carl Jung was drawn to Alighieri's The Divine Comedy. Each story reflects the psychological bent of these two theorists. Paradise Lost is a story of rebellion, ambition, and war. In short, the authority problem. The Divine Comedy is about repentance and rebirth, about facing our darkness, or what you would say our shadow, and reclaiming our light, about ending our dissociation from our spiritual whole self. Freud and Milton hint at the primal origins of our pain. Jung and Alighieri give us hope. The former show us a tragedy. The latter take us forward into a comedy whereby what started badly ends with a smile. And that is the end of the essay. Dante called his work The Divine Comedy because after all the trials and tribulations of descending into hell and facing all the different people and the different levels of hell where there's different sins and facing his own shadow, his own self-accusations, it all ends well. It all ends well because he's united with heaven in the end, or we would say united with his spiritual whole self. He comes through it all unscathed and is a lighter being because of it. That is why Dante referred to it as a comedy, because it ends well. And thus you could say the same thing about our lives as we work with the Course and come to some understanding that all that we held so dire and so serious, once we really can see things from above the battleground and experience the grace and innocence of our spiritual self, once we can really start to embody that, all that went before will really seem quite insignificant because our primary existence will be in the now and in the joy and the peace of the now. Thank you for listening. I hope this has been of help. Tune in again. Bye.